Hello and welcome. My name is Carlos Rodriguez. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Cobb County Board of Ethics. I want to welcome those attending and watching. It is the function of this board to protect against improper influence by receiving, hearing, and resolving complaints of violations of standards required by the Cobb County Code of Ethics. This board has the authority to conduct investigations as it deems necessary, make proposals or recommendations to the County Board of Commissioners, to issue advisory opinions as provided in the code. Seeing 6 members of this board, there is a quorum to hold this meeting. I'd ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, identify the office holder or body that appointed you to the board. And again, I'll start. My name is Carlos Rodriguez. I was appointed by Judge Kelly Wolk, a probate court judge. Doug?
My name is Doug Shaddix. I was appointed to this board by the Cobb County Board of Commissioners.
My name is Janet Savage. I was appointed to this board by Carla Jackson, the Cobb County Tax Commissioner.
My name is Ron Yonker, and I was appointed by the State Court Clerk, Angie Davis.
I am Martha Oliver. I was appointed by our Solicitor General, the Honorable Barry Morgan.
And my name is Roswell Story, and I was appointed by Sheriff Neil Warren.
Thank you. Counsel, do you want to take up the oath to Ms. Oderkirk, or do you want for us to handle the minutes first?
Let's do the oath first so that she can vote on the minutes.
Okay.
So Ms. Oderkirk, if you'll raise your right hand, please. Thanks. Again?
Oderkirk.
Ms. Oderkirk.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that you'll faithfully administer and fulfill your duties as a board member as provided in the Cobb County Code of Ethics and in the best interest of Cobb County, Georgia, such say I do?
I do.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. Welcome, Ms. Oderkirk.
Thank you.
So the minutes of the May 12th meeting should have been disseminated to everyone. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And a second. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? The minutes have been approved from the May 12th meeting. I understand that there is no old business to take care of, but there is new business. So I'd like to ask Counsel Lynn Rainey to introduce the pleadings and legal consequences of the complaint that's been filed and kind of set out the procedure that this board has to follow today.
The purpose of this public meeting of the Cobb County Board of Ethics, which is being broadcast on TV 23, is to conduct an investigatory review to consider a complaint filed by Denise White against Cobb County Commissioner Joanne Burrell and the reply of Commissioner Burrell filed by her attorney, Deborah Dance. The Ethics Board is required to proceed strictly in accordance with the Cobb County Code of Ethics. We will follow the rules set out in the code and will take such action as is authorized and required by that code. The board will be transparent, fair, and impartial to each of the parties. The next step under the code when a complaint and a reply are filed is to conduct an investigatory review. We must meet in public to discuss the matter. The board members have not previously met and discussed this matter. The board members have received copies of everything the parties have filed and had the opportunity to individually review in the privacy of their own homes and offices. Tonight will be the first occasion that the members will have to discuss the matter. Nothing has been decided. The sole purpose of an investigatory review is, quote, to determine whether specific substantiated evidence from a credible source exists to support a reasonable belief that there has been a violation of the Cobb County Code of Ethics. Dr. White and Ms. Dance, this is your opportunity to tell the Board of Ethics in person why they should either proceed or not proceed with this complaint. You have been provided with these instructions previously, but let me remind you of them to make sure anyone else present or watching on TV knows how we must conduct this matter. The Ethics Board will not be reviewing your testimony or testimony from your witnesses during this investigatory review, other than what is already in an affidavit. The board will consider affidavits, documents, or materials not already, the board will be considering affidavits, documents, and materials already filed with the clerk of the county commission and previously provided to the ethics board. The board will only be considering the filed written complaint of Dr. White, the written reply of Commissioner Burrell through her attorney, and filed affidavits, documents, and materials. You are invited to state to the board in this meeting how the materials already filed support or do not support a reasonable belief that there's been a violation of the Code of Ethics. Please understand, Mr. Rodriguez, the chairman of the board, has a responsibility to ensure this meeting proceeds in an orderly, civil, and respectful manner within the bounds of the Code of Ethics, and so he must retain the discretion to limit or terminate your presentation should it stray from matters subject to our jurisdiction. The board will first hear from Dr. White. When she is through speaking, it will hear from Ms. Dance. The board will then discuss the matter here in public and vote. If a majority of the board determines that specific substantiated evidence from a credible source exists to support a reasonable belief that there's been a violation of the Code of Ethics, a public formal hearing will be set at a later date, at which both parties will be allowed to testify under oath, present the sworn testimony of witnesses and evidence. If the board, after such a formal hearing, determines clear and convincing evidence shows any violation of the Code of Ethics, it may issue a censure or reprimand of a commissioner. However, if a majority of the board determines today that no specific substantiated evidence from a credible source exists to support a reasonable belief that there's been a violation of the Code of Ethics, it will dismiss the complaint. Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor to you to preside over the investigatory review.
Okay, thank you, counsel. To the parties, to Dr. White, to Ms. Dance, Commissioner Burrell, thank you for being here. What I'd like to do, as Mr. Rainey explained, is that we'll hear from both sides first. Dr. White is the complainant. You would go first in just explaining your allegations, and then we'll hear from Ms. Dance next. I then would like the board, if the board has any questions, to ask those of the parties first. We'd ask the complainant, Dr. White, then any questions for the respondent, counsel for Commissioner Burrell, Ms. Dance. And then at that point, I would like to give both parties just a couple of minutes to respond after fielding those questions from the board, to the extent that you feel like you need to make any additional statements to kind of summarize, but just be very brief, and don't feel like you have to do that. And then the board will discuss out in the open, okay, kind of what our concerns are, what our thoughts are, and then we'll vote, okay? So we'll start with Dr. White, if you'd like to go ahead. Do you have a microphone there?
I do.
Okay.
Do you have a copy of the affidavit?
Just speak into the mic a little
Do you
bit.
have a copy of the affidavit already? Okay.
Yes, your
Okay.
affidavit, we do.
Okay. So on January 30th, I sent an email to Commissioner Burrell, and in response, I received an attachment, and that is where the complaint comes in. Well, I cannot speak to Commissioner Burrell's motivation in sending out an excerpt prepared by a company paid by the Parker family to represent their company Petland. I can address the appearance of conflict of interest and lack of impartiality in doing so. On the night of the code amendment hearing, dozens of people spoke to the commission about the amendment to ban the sale of dogs and cats in Cobb County. The United States government's Office of Government Ethics outlines the impartiality rule as, quote, under the primary conflict of interest law, an employee must not participate in any particular matter affecting the employee's financial interests. An impartiality rule goes even further by focusing on appearance issues. This rule applies even when the employee is free of financial conflicts of interest. The impartiality rule requires an employee to consider appearance concerns before participating in a particular matter if someone close to the employee is involved as a party to that matter. This requirement to refrain from participating or recuse is designed to avoid the appearance of favoritism in government decision-making. Further, Cobb County's Code of Ethics 2.42a states that public interest requires that the county protect against improper influence or the appearance of improper influence with respect to the conduct of public officials. Section 2.47c states to, quote, to avoid the appearance of impropriety. With these definitions in mind, I return to a quote in the first line of Commissioner Burrell's email to me. Quote, because of Attorney General's opinion, parentheses, see attached, I voted on Tuesday night to have this withdrawn at this time from consideration, end quote. However, what was attached was not the Attorney General's opinion from a publicly available website, but an excerpt written by Taylor English Decisions, a company paid by Petland to lobby as well as to legally represent them. The document attached was misrepresented as the law and is an interpretation of the law, not the law itself. As evidenced by the discussion on the night of the public hearing, legal experts have called into question this interpretation of the law. Whether the proposed amendment was legal or not is a question for the legal experts. What is not in question, however, is the appearance of compromised ethics by using a packaged piece of writing by and for the single party whose interests would have been impacted by the amendment. A person can appear to have a conflict of interest even if that person does not gain financially or otherwise from a decision. A person's impartiality can be called into question when, instead of sending the actual AG's opinion out to constituents, that person uses a document that was paid for by the main party whose business would have been impacted had the amendment been passed, and misrepresents that as law. As a citizen who is required by law to undergo state-mandated ethics training as well as sign ethics disclosure forms twice a year, and is subject to dismissal and potential prosecution for even the appearance of ethics violations, I am especially cognizant of what actions can be construed as the appearance of ethics violations. Commissioner Burrell attaching a document to constituents that clearly misrepresents and favors Petland's interpretation of the law may not have benefited her, but it certainly gives the appearance of a conflict of interest and lack of impartiality. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Dr. White. Ms. Dance?
Yes, good afternoon. Sorry about the cracking of the voice. I suppose it's the times we're in. I have the honor of representing Commissioner Burrell here, whom I've known for many, many years and who I know is a strong advocate for pets in particular. So it's a little bit ironic that we're here on an issue involving ethics related to that particular subject. But I know that the board has before it the affidavit of Commissioner Burrell and attached documents that put this whole issue that has just been described to you in its proper context. It's not appropriate just to consider how the document appeared to Dr. White when she asked the commissioner for information, and the commissioner was forthcoming and provided information. So by way of background, the Board of Commissioners considers code amendments at regular intervals. the Board of Commissioners had scheduled 2 public hearings for hearing code amendments. The provision addressing the sale of pets was scheduled to come, was scheduled as a proposed code amendment, was scheduled to come before the board. It was announced to the public. The public was in attendance. Commissioner Burrell received numerous emails, information, et cetera, regarding this subject before even approaching this meeting. It is not unusual for an advocate of a party, and I'm saying either party, because in these particular circumstances, the interested persons are the persons who are advocating for the pets. They're also the interested persons are the persons who are advocating for the continuation of their business. It's not unusual, and we've set this forth in the affidavit, for commissioners, all commissioners, to hear from interested parties. In fact, attached to the affidavit are documents that indicate that this particular individual who's been raised as being in question, who was the advocate and the attorney, counsel appointed for Petland, approached every single commissioner by email, and not just in particular Commissioner Burrell. So whether or not there's an allegation that Commissioner Burrell herself had a personal interest, the same question might be raised as to everyone if it was even an appropriate question. However, I submit to you that it's not, because we live in a democracy. We live in an arena where people come and they bring forward their opinions. Dr. White is free to bring forward her opinion. I have sat in this room many, many times when numerous individuals have come and advocated on behalf of pets and have come and advocated on behalf of businesses, and that's what this room exists for. It's a forum of public comment. So to say that it's inappropriate for a commissioner to hear from individuals and to consider the information that they bring for or pro or con on an issue is itself inappropriate. Commissioner Burrell has set forth in her affidavit that she is quite aware of the Code of Ethics. She has been a sitting commissioner since 2011. She is aware of the ethical standards that bind her and every other member of this board, and she's cognizant of it, and she brings that to her position with the county. I believe that what you see in this package, and what I say is this package puts everything in context. There was a meeting held on the 28th. There was a meeting held on the 27th. That was a work session that introduced this package of code amendments. On the 28th, there was a meeting held that spoke specifically, and at that meeting, there was a public hearing, public forum established for people to come forward and present to commissioners who are all seated in this room, presumably, except during COVID times, and so that they could come and present their opinions before the board. The board appropriately heard this. Commissioner Burrell is a sitting member of the board. She appropriately heard these conversations. During one of these conversations, the attorney for Petland, James Bally, who represents numerous individuals in zoning and other matters and appears regularly before the Board of Commissioners. That does not mean that he has a personal relationship with anybody, any member of the board, nor should it be inferred that he has a personal or inappropriate financial or other relationship with any member of the board, simply because he appears on behalf of clients before the Board of Commissioners. So anyway, at the 28th meeting, a number of people came forward and made presentations. Prior to the meeting on the 28th, these code amendments, which are generally in development for months before they're brought forward, these code amendments were known to members of the Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Burrell was familiar with this. Commissioner Burrell, and I've attached it as part of these documents, Commissioner Burrell actually circulated to other members of the board prior to these public hearings information that she received from the Attorney General, Carr, which was the official opinion of the Attorney General issued in December 2019 to a different jurisdiction, the city of Canton, which was considering a similar ordinance to the ordinance that was being considered by Cobb. So Commissioner Burrell was aware of that document. She had the entire document. And so it's not James Bally that brought it to her attention, it's her own diligence that brought it to her attention, and she was well aware of the existence of this opinion by the state's Attorney General, stating that in this particular matter, state law preempts local law, and it would be inappropriate for the board to adopt a law that favored local law over state law. So she was aware of this opinion, and she herself disseminated it to all members of the board. So coming into the meeting on the 28th, this information was known. Individuals came and made presentations. One of those individuals, as mentioned, was James Bailey. James Bailey presented a slideshow on behalf of a series of slides on behalf of his client. One of those slides summarized, if you see in this package, that's Commissioner Burrell's package, the opinion of the Attorney General is about 10 pages long. Mr. Bailey summarized in a single page, which was presented on a slide, the Attorney General's opinion and the substance of it, which I've just described to you. In her efforts to be responsive to Dr. White, because Dr. White wrote her the next day and said, well, let me back up a second. At the 28th meeting, exercising her conscience and exercising her knowledge of the law and her understanding of her ethical obligations, because one of the ethical obligations is that she abide by law, Commissioner Burrell made a motion that it be removed from consideration as part of the code amendments, this particular provision that related to the sale of pets. Present at that meeting were 4 members of the Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Burrell was joined by 1 member of the Board of Commissioners in favor of removing consideration of that particular portion of the code amendments at that time. 2 members voted against that. That left the board with a tie, 2-2. The tie was to be broken by the 5th member of the board at the following meeting. After that night, Commissioner Burrell had nothing further to do, no interest, no involvement with her vote. So at the time she cast the vote on the 28th, what was known to her was this information related to the Attorney General's opinion, the public comment that she had heard here, and she weighed it all. And she made what she believed was a vote in accordance with her oath of office. So on the 29th, Dr. White wrote, as is her right, Commissioner Burrell. Commissioner Burrell did nothing but be responsive to Dr. White. And if you read the email that she sent her, it says, "Thank you for your email. Because of the Attorney General's opinion," see attached, "I voted on Tuesday night to have this withdrawn at this time from reconsideration, or from consideration. We will have to see how Commissioner Ott votes on the 11th of February. You will have an opportunity to speak during the Code Amendments public hearing at the BOC meeting on February 11 at 9 a.m. in the 100 Cherokee Street BOC meeting room on the 2nd floor. Thank you for your comments and input. We appreciate your participation in the Code Amendment process." And rather than attach the full Attorney General opinion, she attached a document that was presented at the very same meeting on the 28th. This document was presented in a public meeting. Anybody present at the public meeting saw this document. This is not a secret document. This is not a document that was intended to say, oh, Commissioner Burrell has a cozy relationship with this attorney. This is a document that was published in an open forum, and it was attached to her response to Dr. White. I cannot tell from Dr. White's letter to Commissioner Burrell whether or not she was in attendance. It appears that she had an awareness of what happened at the meeting the night before, and if she did, then she was aware that this had been presented. The fact that it is attached as a summary document of an Attorney General's opinion contains zero evidence, no evidence, that there is an improper conflict of interest that caused Commissioner Burrell to vote, and the allegation is that she should have abstained from voting. There is zero evidence, not your standard is there any specific substantiated evidence from a credible source to exist to support a reasonable belief that a violation of the Code of Ethics has occurred. There is no merit or substance to the allegation that her attachment of a document that was presented in a public hearing that merely summarizes an Attorney General's opinion, which this individual commissioner had previously reviewed, considered, debated upon, it does not indicate any conflict of interest. Dr. White references Section 2-46. That provision says that officers must not take part in any personal, business, or professional activity or receive or retain any direct or indirect financial interest that places them in a position of conflict between their private interest and the public interest that relates to their responsibilities and duties as officers. There is zero evidence that providing a single slide from a public hearing attached to a document that's responsive to an email in which a constituent said, "Please tell me why this was taken off the table." The commissioner responds, "It was taken off the table because I was persuaded that the Attorney General knew what he was talking about in December when he told the city of Canton that they couldn't do exactly what Cobb County was planning to do." Excuse me. So the allegation that there is what existed at the time of her decision, an obligation on her part to refrain from voting is not substantiated. Section 2-47, which Dr. White has quoted, says that there is an obligation to abstain to avoid conflicts of interest. But again, the code section says it shall be a violation of the code for any officer to participate directly or indirectly through a decision, approval, disapproval, recommendation, or in any other matter upon the following, each of which is deemed to be a conflict of interest. And then it proceeds to talk about a matter in which that person has an immediate relative or any interest of an immediate relative of the officer is involved. There is no allegation of that. Any matter in which the officer has a financial interest, a fiduciary interest, a corporate interest, or any employment interest, there is no evidence of that. Any matter in which the requirements of impartiality as contained in Section 2-46 would be violated. Commissioner Burrell, along with all other members of the board, sat here and listened to individuals from both sides of the fence come and talk about the merits and demerits, and also consider this other document. There is zero evidence that she was partial, and that she was partial to this particular business as she approached her business of executing her oath of office on behalf of the county. So following public comment on January 28th, she moved to withdraw the prohibition as to the sale of dogs and cats. As mentioned, she didn't have any further action with that. It fell to Commissioner Ott upon his return 2 weeks later to cast the deciding vote in that matter. Commissioner Burrell, there's no evidence or indication that Commissioner Burrell sought to influence that vote. There's no evidence, indication, or even allegation that that would be true. Dr. White has simply taken an exception to the manner in which Commissioner Burrell responded, and I will say that as a person who's sometimes written to individuals and not gotten a response, I think it's pretty incredible that the day after a constituent writes to a commissioner and says, "Please tell me why you took this off the table," the commissioner says, "I'm going to tell you why I took it off the table. I took it off the table because there's this opinion. I was persuaded by it, and I took action accordingly." That's transparency. That's what we advocate in open government. That's what I believe Commissioner Burrell stands for. If there's any questions as to the averments of the affidavit of Commissioner Burrell, we're happy to answer those. I trust that you've had the opportunity to review the documents that are attached. And as mentioned, what this affidavit creates is the context. The context in which this occurred clearly indicates that Commissioner Burrell considered a lot of information before she reached a decision. She did not just consider a personal, private, or financial interest or relationship. And so I would ask, as we did in our motion to dismiss, that you would dismiss the instant complaint. Thank you.
Thank you. To the members of the board, are there any specific questions to Dr. White?
You know, I don't have any particular questions, but I sat in the commission meeting from 1970 through 2000, and I saw the commissioners work with different lawyers, with different people, trying to gain information about the subject they were going to have to vote on. And I see this as just a way Mrs. Burrell and the other Board of Commissioners were trying to gain information to be able to vote in a proper way. That's what.
Do you have some questions, Doug?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have 2 questions.
Okay.
Dr. White, is it your contention that Commissioner Burrell personally benefited in any way from any of these actions?
No, that wasn't my purpose. When I got the email in return, I saw, and I had seen this the night before, but I thought, Ted, the purpose-built consulting firm, what does that mean? And I looked it up and found out that this was from a lobbyist and thought,
I understand.
it may not be a conflict of interest as in financial or personal gain, but it's certainly the appearance to send out something from the one business in this county who would have been impacted by the vote. And I'm not talking about whether I agree with the vote or not. It's about this document being sent to constituents and how many people got this. And this is not the Attorney General's opinion. The Attorney General's opinion is on his website. It's 2019-2.
We have
You
that.
can find it in 3 seconds. This,
I've
I
got
had to
that.
hunt for.
Follow-up then, is it your contention that any of Commissioner Burrell's actions were illegal? Is it your contention that any of her actions were illegal?
I'm not an attorney. I'm saying as a constituent, when I received this, it was the appearance of conflict of interest, the appearance of a lack of impartiality, which in my position would have resulted in my immediate dismissal. Immediate dismissal.
So, Dr. White, the issue that you have is that the excerpt was attached as opposed to the Attorney General's opinion?
Yes. Yes.
If you had received, or if you knew that commissioners were expressing their opinions about why they were voting a certain way and shared, for example, an email from an advocate to the whole board and the public and everyone in attendance at the public meeting, would you still have an issue that there would be a conflict of interest or some evidence of impartiality because a commissioner was explaining why they voted a certain way by citing an email that maybe a policy advocate has sent to them?
I think that is an issue because they were talking about how they could not continue with the discussion of that particular amendment because, according to the Georgia Attorney General, it was not legal to have such an amendment. Although Fulton County and one other county has such a law. This is discussing the city of Canton, which I don't know the difference in how cities versus counties work, but I do know that as of yesterday, the Fulton County and Cherokee County laws had not been challenged. And this is a county. So in my limited knowledge of the law, county, that makes sense to me. But it was just using this to justify why it is not legal when a simple link to the Attorney General's site, which I found in 10 seconds online and read 2019-2, okay, I may or may not agree with that particular opinion, but that doesn't matter. This was a paid for by Petland. That is my issue. This should not be distributed to constituents as justification for taking a certain stance on the law.
Hey, Ms. White, I want to make sure I understand. If things were flipped and Commissioner Burrell chose to send a paraphrase of another advocate, if her decision was the other way, right, and chose to summarize the explanation from another advocate, you're saying that that appearance would be inappropriate?
I think it is, especially because the email starts out, "Thank you for your email. Because of the Attorney General's opinion," in parentheses, "see attached, I voted on Tuesday night to have it withdrawn." It wasn't the Attorney General's opinion, it was this, from a paid lobbyist for Petland. Had it been a link to the Attorney General, life would have gone on, agree, disagree, whatever, but life would have gone on and I wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Thank you.
Any more questions of Dr. White?
I have one.
Okay.
Dr. White, the attachment that you're referencing, did all the commissioners receive that very same attachment?
I don't know. This is what was sent to me in Commissioner Burrell's response because of the Attorney General's opinion, see attached, and I got this. It was a slide from the night before, or
Okay.
2 nights before.
Attorney Dance, can you answer that question for me?
Before we move on, I just want to make sure that no one else has any more questions from Dr. White
sorry.
before we start asking questions of the respondent, Ms. Dance. We good? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I do have a follow-up for Dr. White.
Okay.
Had you received that same attachment from any other commissioner, would you have been concerned?
Yes, anybody.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Savage, you had a question for Ms.
Yes.
Dance?
So if you could just repeat it.
Yes, I wanted to know the attachment that Dr. White is referencing, if that attachment was received by all commissioners.
My understanding is that it was.
Okay, thank you.
Was this a part of the presentation at the public hearing?
Yes, it was. So it's a set of slides.
Okay.
There are some separate communications that are also attached to the commissioner's affidavit that indicate that Mr. Bally was a strong advocate on behalf of his client, and that he advocated to all members of the Board of Commissioners.
Okay. Was Mr. Bally a part of the work session on January the 27th?
I don't know. So our understanding is that, you know, there was a work session, that's a presentation usually made on behalf by staff, and that he was one of the public participants in the formal public hearing that was held the following evening.
On the 28th?
Yes.
In the materials that you provided, attachment D, this is an email from
Say B or D?
Mr. Bally. D as in Delta. There's an email from Mr. Bally from the morning of Tuesday, January the 28th.
Yes, I see that.
And there's a mention there in the first paragraph of having provided the members of the Board of Commissioners a hard copy information booklet yesterday. And your motion to dismiss sets out a good chronology for us to follow, but it wasn't clear to me whether the excerpt was provided, and I think you've cleared it up, but whether the excerpt was provided in this booklet, whether Mr. Bally was present for the work session on the 27th, or whether there was any other opportunity for Mr. Bally to have provided this this excerpt, excuse me, prior to the public hearing.
I'm not able to speak for him, but he did present it at the public hearing and provided it to all members of the board.
Any other members of the board have any questions for Ms. Dance? Okay. Any discussion? Or, excuse me, I did want to give both parties an opportunity to kind of have a last word, just a couple of minutes if you could be brief. Dr. White, don't feel obligated that you need to, but just based on the board's questions, if there was anything that you wanted to clear up or anything that the other party had said that you wanted to touch on, you certainly could. Okay. All right, hearing none, any discussion from members of the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
If there's nothing illegal, if there's no assertion that Commissioner Burrell personally benefited and no legal conflict of interest, then I fail to see how the Cobb County Code of Ethics has been violated. And therefore, I move that no specific substantiated evidence from a credible source exists to support a reasonable belief that Commissioner Burrell has violated the Cobb County Code of Ethics, and accordingly ask that Dr. White's complaint be dismissed.
Okay. Do we have any discussion before I call for a vote? I will say that I agree with you, Mr. Shaddix. I think that Dr. White's issue, and she very directly answered my question, which was she took issue with the fact that the excerpt was provided as opposed to the Attorney General's opinion. And maybe that would have been a more palatable way for you to have received a difference of opinion, because ultimately she voted in a way that you didn't agree with. And certainly it is to be commended that members of our community are being vigilant and invested in the decisions that the Board of Commissioners are making, and certainly willing to make a complaint if you see that one is necessary. But I don't see a conflict of interest. I don't see any sort of improper relationship with Petland or Mr. Bally and Commissioner Burrell. Her vote was based on her understanding of the Attorney General's opinion, and she provided an excerpt that, by all accounts, seemed to have been provided for everyone to see, all commissioners and the public, and it was a part of a slideshow presentation for everyone to see, and she was simply explaining to you why she voted a certain way. Whether she should have sent you the Attorney General's opinion as opposed to the excerpt, perhaps we could debate about that. And perhaps in hindsight, Ms. Burrell would do it differently. But the reality is I don't see a conflict of interest, and I don't see that there's been any evidence presented to move forward in the process for a public hearing, to hold evidence, to hold testimony, given what we've heard today. So I would call the motion for a vote. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Okay. Any opposed? None being opposed, it looks like there's been a majority of the board, a unanimous decision to dismiss the complaint. And that closes this case. Mr. Rainey, anything further that we have to take up?
So the only other matter we have is to set our next board meeting. I've checked with the County Communications Department. We have to meet in October unless there are complaints filed before then. And so I've been told that this room in TV 23 is available to this board on October the 13th at 3 o'clock, if that's acceptable to the board.
Does that work for everybody? Okay.
That's all I have.
All right, excellent. So do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Okay, do I have a second? All right, all in favor? All right. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.